All right. So again, welcome everybody to this month's presenter series. Steve Moss, a longtime favorite at the COO Forum, and we we brought Steve out during COVID actually for a little thing that we launched called Executives in Transition. Those of you that remember back to COVID, it's crazy times, and Steve helped put some sanity to everything that was going on in terms of getting people in the right frame of mind, getting orientated to what the conditions were on the ground in terms of, just everything that was happening and the layoffs and whatnot. And we appreciate and love Steve here at the CO Forum. Today's gonna be presenting on the art and science of mentoring. So I'm excited to actually see Steve for the first time because
That's
Steve
right.
predates me at the CO Forum. But it's great to have Steve on board. I'm gonna just do a real quick introductory for Steve. But Steve is the president of Executive Springboard, which he's been doing for 10 years now. Steve, is that correct? About 10 years?
7.
7 years.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
And it's got an amazing organization full of mentors, and is just I guess an expert thought leader in how organizations can leverage mentoring to supercharge their workforces, and to get people off to the right start in terms of onboarding and coaching and so many other things. Prior to that, and or maybe even currently, Steve is also a reviewer at the National Science Foundation. Is that correct?
That is. Yeah.
Working on anything fun there?
I can't talk about it.
I can't talk about it.
I think national intelligence would be after me or something if I spoke about it. But
All right, all right, all right. We'll keep that one a secret. But Steve has held CEO roles in marketing and other roles as well, chief marketing officers and animation, and kind of the list goes on. I could spend quite a bit of time to go through Steve's resume. He's a graduate of Georgetown and University of Pennsylvania Wharton School. And we're just excited to have Steve here. And I'm going to just stop talking and let you take over.
Yeah.
And then at the end, I'll share a little bit more about what we have going on at the CO Forum the next few months. So
Terrific. Well, let me see if I can get a presentation up. I think that may have worked. Glad to be with everybody today. And yeah, this is actually the second time that I presented. As Chuck mentioned, I spoke during the COVID recession when so many people were in transition, and the issue that I tried to raise was you're all focused on getting an offer. And there's a lot of stuff that's going to happen once that offer happens and once you end up in the job, because the last thing any of you want is to be listening to me again a year from now because that gig didn't work out too well. And this time, the topic is on the art and science of mentoring. And both of these topics are near and dear to me because, as Chuck mentioned, I lead a team of about 120 executive mentors. And we're in about a dozen different countries, and think about whatever function we kind of have that covered. And one of the big areas that we work in is senior onboarding, along with leadership development, along with things in the DEI space. So this now gives me a chance to open the lens a little bit and talk more about mentoring. My subtitle here is a discussion with the COO Forum, and I truly hope this is a discussion and not just me talking at you for a long time. I mentioned to Fiona, she's going to help me out with this. I'm terrible looking at chat while I'm presenting. So if you've got a question to ask, throw it in there, and Fiona's will interrupt me, and we'll get into what's probably more important than what I have to say, which is what you want to know about. I think I also want to make a point that there are for each of you, there may be like 3 segments, and I'm thinking about this as 3 different audiences, but I think they're all kind of contained in each one of you. And in one respect, you as leaders of organizations are thinking about the organization and how can you make your company better. And I want to talk a little bit about some of the benefits of mentoring for your company, but also some of the best practices that companies can put into place. That's one. Number two, as a senior member of your organization, you're probably in a position to be a mentor for people. So I want to try to talk a little bit as well about how can you become a better mentor for the folks that you may be supporting. And the third area is in the spirit of we're all works in progress. Um, you probably find times where you need a mentor yourself. And maybe that's internally, maybe that's not, but we'll think about that too. So 3 different perspectives on this from the company standpoint and then from both sides of the mentorship relationship. Okay. All right. A little story to talk about here to start. There was a I did something to my grouping here that I wish I hadn't done. So give me just a moment as I'm looking at the gallery of speakers, and I'd rather look at my presentation, and it's not coming up for me. Oh boy. Okay. Give me a minute to get my act together. This is all a question of there I go. Okay, I'm good now. So long time ago, Odysseus was the king of Ithaca, not the one in upstate New York, but the one in ancient Greece. And he asked his friend named Mentor to look after his son Telemachus while Odysseus was away in Troy fighting to return Helen to her husband. And the war in Troy ends, and Odysseus takes a long route home. He doesn't just go from what's now Turkey to Greece. He goes through South Europe, he goes to North Africa, and he's all over the place. And people don't know whether he's alive or dead. Odysseus's wife, Penelope, was confronted by suitors. Everybody wanted to think that Odysseus was dead and marry his wife. And the son, Telemachus, prayed for guidance. The goddess of wisdom is Athena, and Athena takes the form of a credible messenger who was Mentor, this guy who was looking after Telemachus, to tell Telemachus, resist. Don't let in. Don't let these guys swoop in and marry your mom. So Telemachus gets a little bit concerned that they may be after him, trying to attack him, and he sets sail from Ithaca to Sparta. And he meets with the king in Sparta and finds out, yes, indeed, your father is still alive, and he's having problems getting back home, but he will be getting there. And he and Odysseus land back in Ithaca, and together they fight and kill 108 suitors of Penelope, and Odysseus and Penelope live happily ever after. So there you get a little bit of the story of where the word mentor comes from. It was from this guy who was looking after Telemachus. And it's an interesting dynamic to think about here, because this relationship was not father-son. It wasn't the goddess talking to Telemachus directly and imparting wisdom. He probably would have been blinded by her wisdom. So she comes in the form of this credible, believable source that was somebody who was supportive of him. And if now, and Chuck, here's where we do the teleporting, get in your DeLorean and hit 88 miles an hour and flick the switch on the flux capacitor, and we go forward 3,300 years, and we still have mentors, right? And the mentors are now in our personal life as well as in the careers that we have. And the mentor today is this credible messenger who is sharing wisdom, normally with another generation of people. And it's important to maybe draw some distinctions between what mentors do and what some other people do who are close to that. So you can think of teachers and they impart knowledge. Maybe not the wisdom, but they impart knowledge. It's close. It's not exactly the same thing. You can have a coach, and coaches are often there to try to enhance performance. And when I take a look at the work that we do at Executive Springboard and compare it to coaching, if we did a Venn diagram, there'd be 90% overlap between the two. The bigger difference for us is there are coaches and there are mentors, and the mentors in my organization are people who have sat in the chairs of the executives that they're helping out. And coaches are generally trained to be great question askers and active listeners, but they may not have the same credibility that comes from having had that experience. So the coaches there are providing context and perception, perspective, and support. I want to see if we've got some folks, since I haven't, come back here. I haven't heard any questions at this point. I'm kind of interested in some other mentors that are kind of famous. So I'll throw out a couple and at least in question form, and I'd be open to any others that you might have. So who would you see as Luke Skywalker's mentor?
Obi-Wan.
Obi-Wan. Yeah, why not Yoda?
I don't know. Obi-Wan, first thing that came to mind.
Yeah, I think I agree with you that it's Obi-Wan more. I think Yoda's the teacher.
Yeah.
And maybe not the mentor. And it's a fine line there because you can have both. A teacher can be a mentor for sure. How about Harry Potter's mentor?
Dumbledore.
Dumbledore. Yeah, I'd buy that. There are other people who are important in his life, people from a different generation. McGonagall might be somebody who comes to mind, but she's more the teacher, and she's more in a direct line because she's the head of Harry's house. So I think that fits that it's that it would be McGonagall. Who is Bill Gates's mentor?
Ooh, that's a good one.
Any guesses?
I'd say Warren Buffett.
I'd say Warren Buffett too.
Yeah.
Yeah. And an interesting thing there, interesting dynamic to consider is that mentorship to some degree is two-way, right? So Warren Buffett was definitely somebody who influenced Gates in the way that a mentor would. But Gates, what Gates has done in philanthropy had a very large impact on Warren Buffett, and how Warren Buffett has thought about giving away his fortune is something that ties directly to Bill Gates. So it's two ways there, and we'll talk a little bit about this later on today. But you can think of this as reverse mentoring as well as the mentoring that was going on there. Okay, so we're getting an idea of who some of these folks are. I want you to help me out on who may be the mentor here. A mom, a god, or Helen Hunt's Aunt Meg in Twister.
Aunt May.
Aunt Meg. Ding, 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 ding. Let's take a look at why. All right. A mom is too close. Odysseus was too close to Telemachus to play that role. If you take this into the workplace, a boss is seldom a report's mentor. There's normally some separation that happens. It may be skipping a generation and or being in a different function. or a different business unit. So it's very seldom something that you would see an adjacency where there's this direct relationship. There are all sorts of other other things that come into play and complications that get into that. So a mom is a relationship, a mom or a dad is a relationship that is too close. A sibling is a relationship that is often too close, not always. If there's a big gap in age, then sometimes an older brother or sister may play that mentoring role with somebody. And then there's the God, too powerful. That was the reason that Athena took the form of mentor rather than appearing as herself. So comparing that, you get to Aunt Meg, who is wise and supportive and not this direct link to Helen Hunt, but close enough that there's a perspective that she can learn from. All right. So there's not the intimidation factor that there was with the God, and it's not the direct mom relationship, but it's close enough that it's somebody who carries with them some respect and offers support. Okay. So if we think about mentoring, it's part of kind of like a three-headed approach to professional development. And I want to talk briefly about each one of these areas. I mean, in professional development, there's often things that happen in education, in assignments, or in support. And in the case of education, you find people may be taking seminars. They may be going for an executive MBA program, something of that sort. I do some lecturing as I operate as a guest lecturer at the University of Minnesota's executive MBA program. And I normally have like the last session that the students have before they graduate. And I talk to them about some of the onboarding things that happen, because interesting thing that happens with those folks who've gone through that education, and it's something to keep in mind as leaders in organizations. They have an expectation that they're going to get promoted, and that promotion will normally come within the next year. And there's kind of a split in the road that happens. Either they get promoted or they'll find someplace else where they'll go. And so I start wondering a little bit, in doing the right thing for an employee, that providing that education may be there. It may not have the best return on investment, because if you don't have a place for them afterwards, they may not be there for you to get the benefit from the education that they've received. And then, of course, there are seminars and other things that people go in. You can also look at assignments. This may be a stretch assignment that somebody has. This may be that somebody is put in charge of a task force or given some role that's other than a full-time position. But this is a second area that is a big piece in professional development. And the third area is support. And that might be a mentor, that might be a coach, that might be a peer circle, might be an organization like the COO Forum or a Vistage or something like that. But that's another area, that's the third kind of leg on the stool, if you will, on professional development. Now, mentoring recently came out on top of as the number one learning and development tool in the LinkedIn Workplace Learning Report that was published in the past few months. And if you take a look at how mentoring is used in corporations around the world and in the United States, 84% of Fortune 500 companies have mentoring programs. 96% of Fortune 100 companies have mentoring programs. 100% of Fortune 50 companies have mentoring programs. I don't want you to think that it's something that requires a big company to do. It's not something that necessarily is going to take a huge um, investment to get going. But those companies seem to know something about the power of what happens in mentoring. So I'm going to take a pause here, and if there's anything, as I've got this horrible photo of a three-headed dog on my slide, any questions people have up to this point before we dive in a little bit deeper? We're all good?
No, I guess I have a question, Steve. You know, as a leader, in as a senior leader, we tend to be a little bit older than the new generation coming in by a few years, and so there's a bit of that generational difference, and
Right.
so I just think in being a leader, it feels like being a mentor at sometimes. Would you, how do you rationalize that, or is there any, you know, from your perspective, danger in a leader being too much of a mentor versus, you know, how do you separate that? I'm just curious your thinking.
Pardon me. In part, that's why it often is a relationship that isn't in a direct line. So if you're the vice president of operations for an organization, it might be really intimidating for a senior manager to have you as their mentor, a senior manager of operations. That may not be the same dynamic at all if you're mentoring a senior manager from finance. So that might be kind of, you know, thinking about not that adjacency, but almost like how a knight moves in chess, as a way of thinking about that, trying to create enough of a differentiation. It's not that mom and dad relationship. It's something that's a little bit further distance. And yeah, it can be something that, you know, you want to have a little bit of space. You don't want to have so much space that it's intimidating for somebody. So I'd leave it at that. Does that help?
It does. Yep. Thanks, Steve.
Well, let me go a little bit deeper and ask a few questions, get into some answers to questions about what's in it for them. Okay, and again, thinking about this from the three different perspectives, what are the benefits that mentees get, mentors get, and organizations get from mentoring practice? For mentees, one thing that pops out is it really increases the likelihood of a promotion for the mentee by like fivefold. So research has shown that in a given year, people in organizations who were not mentored had a 5% likelihood of being promoted, whereas people who were being mentored had a 25% likelihood of being promoted. So significant increase in opportunities that come from that are tied into career development and advancement. And it also has positive impacts on mentees' job satisfaction. So when asked, do you feel like your contribution is valued? If you're not mentored, it's in the 70s, low 70s, 72%. If you are mentored, it's more like 88%, feeling like their contribution is valued. And same thing carries over, not just on that part of value, but on how they view their own compensation. Are you well paid or not? And it's over a 10% swing of people feeling that they are well paid, even if they're at comparable levels with somebody else when they're mentored. So they're getting something that's a little bit less tangible, perhaps, but it ties into their satisfaction and is seen as part of what they're getting from that experience, from the mentoring experience. It's interesting to note that research shows that about 76% of employees want to be mentored, and only about 37% have mentors. Now, I'll throw about some other numbers later that will show that more companies than that, particularly larger companies, have mentoring programs, but they don't go everywhere. You're not finding something that's universal in terms of how mentors are treated. So 76% want it, 37% get it. There's a big gap. So there's opportunities for organizations to expand even what they have. I'm curious on what you might think. There's then 24% who don't want mentors. And I'm kind of interested in what you might think are the main reasons why. Why would somebody not want a mentor?
I'm
think they
thinking
know
of
it all.
there's some people in our organization who are a little further on in their careers. They're not gunning to be in leadership, and they're just happy where they are and they don't want anything else on the to-do list. It's a small percentage, but I think there are some people like that.
You know what? I hadn't thought about that one, and that's a good one. And you have to respect that people have different career objectives. At the same time, the mentors may be able to play a role that goes beyond just that promotion or something else. So in terms of growth, that may still be there, and I get
Yeah.
that. Other ideas?
Go ahead, Rel.
Some people use YouTube, or they just read, they do things independently for mentoring. I have some friends that actually, they call it YouTube University or YouTube Mentorship.
Okay,
It's more customized for them.
got it. Well, it's interesting because that is, I mean, that's customized, but a mentor can be, you're sitting one-on-one with somebody, that can be awfully customized as well. Any other thoughts?
Laurie had a question.
Go ahead, Laurie.
First of all, our mentor is always one-on-one.
I'm trying to think of a situation where mentors have not been one-on-one. Can we just say that I imagine there can be situations where they're working in groups. The benefit is normally something that is personal. And so I would say that a lot of it, there almost always is a one-on-one component in it.
And then, how long should a mentor relationship last?
Well, that depends. I'd say Telemachus and Mentor had a relationship that lasted probably about 8 years in doing what they were doing. And I would think that with Bill Gates and Warren Buffett, it may be about the same. In organizations, it often works well to do for like a year. In the work that I do with Executive Springboard, we normally do it for about 8 months. And we do it for that level because we do a cadence of 2 meetings per month. And after the experience we had when we started was, let's do it for 6 months and ask people if they wanted to go for another 6 months. And everybody said, yeah, I want to go for another 6 months. And then by month 10 or 11, the mentor and the mentee were kind of looking at each other saying, isn't this game played? Have we accomplished what we wanted to do? And so I kind of took a look at things and realized there were diminishing returns that happened at a certain point. And in the way we do this, which is a paid mentorship, there became a point that it seemed like we should cut that off, and we've cut that off at 8 months. But what I would say, if it's being done internally, doing something for 6 months with a cadence that's probably twice a month, and then reducing that cadence to once a month for the next 6 months is a really good way to do it. And as much of a reason as any to limit it to a year is to make sure that those that 39% who don't have mentors today have a shot at getting mentors if you have a formalized program in place. Okay. There were two other reasons that I wanted to give for why folks don't have mentors. And one of them can be if not a red flag, let's just say a yellow warning light on somebody. And that is they don't want to admit that they have a need. And this gets into how coachable somebody might actually be. And most of us, and most of the people who work for us, besides the point that was made earlier about being happy with their station at work, most of us are expected to continue growing. And that may not mean in a promotion, but becoming more effective, becoming more productive in what you do. That is kind of an expectation a lot of us have about the people who work for us, and being able to give people that shot is kind of important. And if somebody is not willing to demonstrate that need, you have to start wondering what their motivation is. That's one thing. The second thing that can play into that, and it happens, and it probably happens a lot with everybody on this call, is a concern over vulnerability. Mentorship is a mentoring relationship is one that is a hallmark of it is making somebody vulnerable, making both people vulnerable. And if you're at a senior enough level in an organization, it's unlikely that you're going to make yourself vulnerable with somebody who someday might be, the person you have an issue with. And that's why organizations will often turn to executive coaches or external mentors or something else, because internally it doesn't work so well as you get close to the top of the pyramid. Any questions on that?
Steve,
Yeah.
we use mentors, or I've implemented a mentoring program in my company. We're just a small business, right?
Mhm.
But anytime I hire somebody new, we assign them. Well, I'm going to stop. And that is not an accurate statement. Anytime I hire somebody that is junior
Mhm.
to the company, and you've made me think, why don't my senior people have mentors? Anytime we have somebody that's junior, we always assign a mentor to them.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
As part of their onboarding process to ensure, especially post-COVID, right, where I've got people who
Terrific.
might
Yep.
who are spending most of their week remotely, and or potentially in another state. So we've used it as a way to create interdependence, and to have connection within the team from those who they may not normally work with on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, and that's how they learn the culture too.
Right, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And that's something that I wanted to be able to, impart on my people. But you really got me thinking about, why don't I have my senior team, because I've got a couple of new hires in the mid to senior level team that don't have mentors. And I guess, do you usually, when you're setting up mentors, do you usually set up some sort of a goal for them, or is it organic?
It works best when there is a goal. And it's interesting because it certainly can be organic. In a lot of organizations, I'd say before organizations put mentoring programs in place, there is usually some mentoring that's going on, and it's informal and it's organic, and it may be that somebody has reached out to an executive and asked their opinion on something, and a friendship or relationship, mentoring relationship kind of forms that way, and that's great when that happens. Recognizing the benefits that can come from mentorship, though, is something that often will lead organizations to do something that's a bit more formal. And what you may find, and organizations may differ in how they go about this. You might try to set up goals for the entire mentoring program. What is this about? And are there metrics that you put in place as setting the bar perhaps as low as enhancing retention, or doing something else that may get more into skill development? And what I think normally works best is for there to be some level of goal setting at a macro level, but definitely within each mentoring engagement, that's something that the mentee should be setting. What do they want to get out of this? And what does success look like? And there might be things that you do to get help from other people, from their supervisor or others. But yeah, I think establishing the goals is really important. And if I can come back to you thinking about those people who are more senior who come in, that's the difficult thing. And that was kind of, without turning this into an advertisement for my business, that was kind of the issue that I saw, was it's really hard to make mentoring work for this at the senior level. Just because at the top of the pyramid, there are fewer people to do the mentoring for a senior person, number one. And number two, and more, I think, more on point, is that issue of vulnerability, and how much will somebody open up to that person who may only be one level ahead, maybe their boss, or maybe somebody, if they were promoted, they'll be running into direct conflicts with. So that's difficult, and that's where sometimes just giving them a sounding board, even if it's like an executive coach or a peer circle group, to be able to join, to be able to share some of the concerns that they had going in. It doesn't do exactly the same thing as internal mentoring. It's not like somebody can say, oh, don't go to this person for that issue, go to that person. You lose that when it's external, for sure. But there are perhaps some other ways of trying to create something, a buddy system or something, so that senior person who is new can gets a leg up on their onboarding.
You hit on kind of all the reasons why I haven't really moved there for my senior
Yeah.
folks,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
Is who would mentor them, right? And most likely, oftentimes, it's I'm thinking of a VP that I just hired, right? And who could be their mentor, right?
Yep. I'm going to save that for my next to last slide. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. Let's take a look at a little bit of the softer side again, staying with the mentees for a minute. So if we had some data before, let me just go into a few other things about what are they getting out of this. They're getting a sense of increased self-confidence, in large part because they have somebody in a senior role, somebody who's credible, who's giving them support, and is helping to build them up. They're getting an increased sense of self-awareness and a capacity to reflect, because somebody is talking to them on a regular basis about themselves. And it's really easy in work to be heads down and just go through it and not think about this. And it takes something to be able to get that reflection going. And maybe some people have the discipline to create a journal for themselves or something like that. But it's a whole lot easier to have a conversation on a regularly scheduled basis with somebody who can hold you accountable for things and ask how things are going and be able to provide different perspectives throughout. So I offer that up as well. There are people who are mentored generally see their communications skills improve. They're having experience in a setting that is low risk for them, talking to somebody who's more senior. This may be the level of people that they are normally presenting to in a higher risk situation. But now they have the chance to practice that with somebody else who can give them feedback along the way. They create a better network personally within the business from the associations that their mentor has with other people. It may be with their boss. It may be opening it up to other people in the organization who they wouldn't have known otherwise. Certainly exposure to new and different perspectives. This is somebody who the mentor's job may be to hear somebody say something and say, hey, how about this? Have you thought about this, etc. And not in an accusatory way at all, but in a constructive way. And that's something that becomes really useful for folks. I heard a story recently about somebody, a CIO in a company, who her CFO had recently retired. And a new CFO came in who had been the vice president of financial planning and analysis before, a position junior to her own. Now this person had been promoted to the CFO role, basically jumping over her in terms of seniority. And she wasn't sure, prior to this happening, she wasn't sure how she was going to be able to, whether she'd be able to work with this guy as her boss. And she and her mentor had conversations about this. And once this happened, one of her strategies was to try to become a report to the CEO instead of to the CFO. At which point she felt, well, okay, if that were to happen, then I'm on an equal playing field with the person who's now my new boss. And her mentor said to her, but that person's the CFO and you're the CIO. Even if you're both reporting to the CEO, you're not on an equal playing field. And she just started laughing because here was a different perspective. You know, she had in her mind how this was all going to work out. And then she just kind of realized that the seniority situation has already changed, and it's not going to, nothing in where my path will go will make a whole lot of difference about that. And that said something to her about if there were any resistance that she had to her new reporting relationship, that went away. I mentioned also improved goal setting. We talked a little bit about goal setting a minute or two ago, but it helps to have somebody else who's pushing on you here and can challenge what you're setting as your goals, and then learning from others' experiences. When I was a kid, I had opened a fortune cookie that said the hardest thing about learning to ride a bike is the pavement. And it's true, you know, things happen along the way that lead to failure. And what becomes kind of important in that is being able to learn from the failure. It's a whole lot less painful to learn from somebody else's failure than your own. So I offer that up. Okay, what's in it for the mentor? Let me start with the pie chart here. Robert Half did a survey about 6 years ago that looked at what mentors saw as the top reason, the top benefit they received from their mentoring. And it went like this: 38% said it improved leadership skills. It improved their leadership skills. And 29% said the satisfaction of helping someone else. It went down from there. Building your professional network, 18%. So while mentees see that as an important piece, so do mentors, because they may be dealing with people who are in different functions, different business units than their own. And staying current on industry trends, staying current on different, you know, take this down to the level of people who are of a different demographic cohort, younger group, and just understanding how they think becomes kind of important. And 1% said waste of time, no benefit at all. So the other list I want to share with you on some of the things that how mentors benefit from this. There's lower anxiety in how they view their own work by being able to see somebody else who's opening up to them as they open up to that individual. They find enhanced meaning in the work, and that kind of ties into that satisfaction of helping someone. They learn from the mentees. It is not just a one-way process on this. Mentors get as much out of this as the mentees do. they start realizing from seeing the reflection that the mentees are going through that they can benefit from that themselves. And the statistic that I showed previously of the increased likelihood of mentee promotion, it's actually around the same rate for mentors, 6%, 6 times promotion rate increase for mentors over mentees. Okay. All right, how about for organizations? What happens in organizations? Well, I like to think of the retention metric as maybe the lowest bar here, but if you take a look at this, the yellow bar indicates percent this was from a study at the Wharton School, percent of people not involved in mentoring who are retained in an organization. It's a coin flip whether they're going to stick around or not. So slightly less than 50% retention rate for people who are not involved in mentoring programs. For mentors, it's up around 68%. For mentees, it's more like 73%. So there is a benefit from mentoring programs on retention. There is a benefit on the profitability of organizations. Organizations with mentorship score about 18% higher in terms of profitability, again, versus a mean that would be the same size organization in terms of headcount. And organizations without mentoring are about 46% lower. Now, you'd say, well, why aren't those two numbers kind of balanced off? If it's 46% lower, why isn't it 46% higher? It's because in the survey that was done by Forbes, there was about 70% of the organizations that had mentoring. So those organizations that didn't have mentoring were the ones that saw that drop in profitability. Also, other studies have shown up to like a 67% increase in productivity. So when people say, I don't have time for mentoring, perhaps, in fact, mentoring would give them more time. And at the very least, I think what they're saying is translation is, this is not a priority for me. And 89%, whether they're mentored or whether the mentor or the mentee, feel highly valued by their organization. So I think from all of this, you can see the win, win, and win of mentoring. So if I can go a little bit further and start thinking about how do you get started in maybe formalizing a mentoring program? What are some of the things that you need to do to get this going? Well, have a commitment and have a plan, first and foremost. And certainly no harm at all in starting off in an informal way and growing your way into something that's more formal. But as it starts becoming more formal, the early days, 3 things to think about, and I'll talk about each one of these. Assigning an administrator, somebody who's going to run this, promoting the idea behind it, getting the support internally, and then the pairing process within the mentorship. So thinking about the administrators, this is where HR, internal marketing, and program management can all come together with somebody. If you decide to go to a more formal program and you assign an administrator, don't underestimate the time requirements. This would be, while it may not be a full-time job, for the first few months, it will certainly be their top priority. And they're going to need to utilize their organizational skills and their communications, and frankly, their selling to be able to get this done. If it's not this administrator, perhaps there is a sponsor as well. And between the two, you can set some of the rules of engagement. What are there any topics that are off limits in the mentoring sessions? Are there things that require action from a mentor, from what a mentee says, or how do you just play that out? Understanding all of that becomes important. Setting some rules ahead of time that people can understand becomes important. And building feedback loops so that you see the progress that's being made, and you can start addressing some of the issues. So if you put all of this together and think about what the administrator is doing in kind of in job specs, they're making connections, they're monitoring the relationships that get created, they're ensuring that the company benefits from the activity, they address issues as they come up, and overall, this is a really good stretch assignment. So one of those other areas we talked about in professional development, the assignments, giving this to somebody is a primo role in learning about combining a bunch of different disciplines under one person for them to expand, and in a role where they can lead in the administration of this. Okay, so if that's administration, how about the promotion piece? And I think of this as omni-channel, in that there's not just one way of doing this, but how do you get this whole thing off the ground? You start with the mentors. You recruit the mentors first. And you think about, can you get the mentors to commit to more than one mentoring engagement at a time? So if you buy into 2 mentoring sessions per month, okay, what this might mean is an hour a week with somebody if they were to do 2. And the reason for looking for multiple ones is there just aren't, it's a supply versus demand issue. And can you get enough mentors or enough mentor capacity to make a dent in the demand that you might have for this? So if you start with mentors in like the leadership team, and then start working your way down to a level where perhaps, at a director level or maybe a senior manager level, there's still enough credibility for them to be leading more junior people. That's the right place to go. And take a look at what you've got then, and you have an idea of how far you can go with recruiting mentees. So all of this can involve getting out with using events to kick this off, email, whatever kind of communications you're using internally, and creating a buzz within the organization about what you're trying to accomplish, and how people can join and get involved in this. Part of this process also would probably be training for both the mentors and the mentees on what they should be doing during the process. My last bullet here is to say stop short of the mentor capacity. So let's say you have 10 mentors in an organization and half of them agree to do 2 and the other half agree to do 1. Well, you can take up to 15 mentees. I would not go as far as just as 15. Because at some point, the choice that the mentees have would go away, and that becomes kind of an important piece. Let me get to that on the next slide. I want to talk about the matchmaking piece of this, and then I'll take a pause and let you ask questions about these 3 components. So if this is done in an informal manner, it's fine to do this, on a spreadsheet, or just knowing that there are these 10 people who are going to be mentors, and there are these 15, 20 people who may be mentees, and making sure that you can keep track of it. It starts getting bigger than that. It's probably best to try to formalize that with a matchmaking questionnaire and mentoring software. And the software is not necessarily that expensive. There are things that are made for small businesses. There are things that are made for enterprise. The enterprise software is normally around $15,000. Others can probably be purchased for $3,000 or less. So it's not a real big commitment on that. And it kind of formalizes the process, and I think helps things out. What I don't think you want to do is say to a mentee, here is your mentor, and not give them any choice. and this is why I suggest giving a little bit more capacity among the mentors than, filling everybody up with the mentees. So if you were to provide options, and in the work that I do with organizations, I'll normally give them three choices, and probably a little bit of a rationale for why this person might be a good fit for that mentee. The mentee and the mentor arranges to have a chemistry call with the mentee. Maybe they know each other, maybe they don't. Just have a question of what are they looking for? How do you think you can help, etc. And then let the mentee confirm the pairing. And probably the most comfortable way to do that is for the mentee to go to the administrator and say, yeah, that vice president who you suggested, I'd like to work with them as my mentor. Or no, I wouldn't. And can I go to my second choice and have a conversation? That would be a rather difficult thing for a junior person to say directly to the senior person, you're fired. I don't want you as my mentor. So having that go through the administrator is a little bit easier. And it's that chemistry call, as much as anything, is normally just a double check over a decision that somebody has already made, but giving them a choice up front rather than them making the assignment themselves. Okay, deep breath from Steve, taking a pause and asking for your questions.
Steve, it's RL. In the chat, I've mentioned gender. I haven't heard you speak about that at all. But in
Yeah.
our organization, I'm the only woman in the C-suite, and then the next woman is like 4 levels down from me. And so I do what I call coffee and snack break. So I have 3 women in the organization, more on the entry level, that I'll just take 30 minutes a month and we just chat about whatever it is, but they're also getting guidance. But yesterday I had a women in aviation open discussion, and they actually want to have a formal internal mentorship program, but they want to just say, if I'm an analyst, then the next layer up, I'll have the next person mentor me, because they're just trying to figure out how to move up in the organization. So they want to be paired with somebody that's a level above them. So that's something we were talking about yesterday, but it's just specifically for the women in the organization. So I
Yeah.
don't know what your thoughts are about gender, like being gender specific, mixing genders, or is it okay just for the women to do that, or should it be open to everyone?
If there may be some specific reasons why women would want to be mentored by women, and I would applaud that if there's a the opportunity to do that. Not everybody cares, and I've seen marvelous mentoring relationships that work either way: female mentee, male mentor, female mentor, male mentee, or the same gender. It can all work. It can all work. I think you've got maybe a specific issue just because there isn't that much representation of women in senior roles, and that puts, that can put more of a demand on you. I'll say that there's another dimension that I wasn't going to talk about, but it's worth bringing up, and that's the difference between mentoring and sponsoring.
Mm-hmm.
And in a lot of organizations, you can start with mentoring, and I think of sponsoring as maybe a subset within mentoring. So a mentor is working with an individual. A sponsor is going to bat for that individual in situations and is talking them up when it comes to opportunities they may have for advancement, et cetera, in the organization. The data shows, and this is where maybe a point for why some of the cross-gender mentoring may have a strong place. The data shows that women sponsors of other women are putting themselves at more professional risk than men sponsors of men. that women who go out of their way to support and endorse other women for promotion in an organization are finding themselves in a riskier position than men are. I wish that weren't the case, but that's what data shows. And so part of this is what I would say is for a lot of the up and coming women in an organization, if they don't have enough resources, female resources in senior levels, then figure out, hopefully they can find some men in the organization who are role models for them just as well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Steve, I have a question or comment. At the executive level, if my boss were to say, "I'm getting you a coach, Chuck," it sounds like, "Uh-oh, what did I do wrong?
Yeah.
Where am I screwing up?"
Yeah.
Whereas a mentor almost
That's
seems,
that's old school, Chuck, but yeah, okay.
yeah. Maybe that's just like a personal pride kind of a thing. Like, oh, I must not, in the sports world, we take it for granted that coaches make, athletes perform better. But in the executive world, it almost seems like it's
like a personal improvement plan or something.
personal.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm on a PIP now because I'm getting assigned a coach. But
Yep.
for a mentor, my perspective has always been like, wow, I finally arrived, because like mentors, when I was coming up, was always reserved for that executive where they got to get out of the office for a couple hours, go have lunch and a coffee, and meet with some other senior executive from outside of their organization. And it almost felt like you arrived when you got, when you received a mentor. And I had never experienced an internal mentoring program, so that would just be foreign to me. But any thoughts on the perceptions? Is that still a thing?
It's less a thing, but it's still a thing. When I have to say that was part of the rationale for me when I was starting my business to want to make this mentors instead of coaches. But I think millennials are far less concerned about that. And Gen Z is far less concerned about that. With coaching, then that distinction is not something that carries the coaching doesn't carry the stigma that I think it
Gotcha.
did for boomers or Gen X.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Fair enough. Thanks.
Okay. So we got to the point where we have people paired off. Then you get through into the guts of a mentorship relationship. It's going to start early on with a session or two, really getting acquainted and setting goals. One thing that can be very helpful in the goal setting phase is for the executive, for the mentor to have some stakeholder interviews with people who know the mentee, to see whether what the mentee is looking for is the same thing that somebody who sees what they do on a day-to-day basis would see as what success looks like. And that might be something also over the course of a year engagement or something like that, to check back in with those stakeholders over time and say, hey, you told me that your expectation was that they would be developing in this area, in this area. Are you seeing evidence of that? And that can be something that's useful in this. And it's basically a one-way flow of communication. It's asking questions of those stakeholders and getting answers. It's not sharing anything that happened in the sessions with anybody else in the organization. So going from those early things about getting acquainted and then setting the goals, then working through with problem solving. What are some of the issues that are there, and how can a mentor help them, the mentee, reflect on their own situation, come up with things, or suggest some alternatives themselves. Opening up your network for that mentee becomes important, and then concluding the relationship. These things do end. Sometimes people might say, okay, well, let's, quarterly, let's get together for a lunch or something as a continuation of this. But one of the things I think is important for people to think about, and a mentor can help with, is for them to ask folks to think about other people that they can create kind of their own personal board of directors. And how is it that they can they can find other people to play a similar role as the mentor in their careers. Want to talk a little bit about best practices in these three spots: the organizations, the mentors, and the mentees going forward. A lot of this we've already covered on the organization. I look at, I think year-long engagements work really well. More cadence, more frequency early on, twice monthly for 6 months, monthly after that. What I find is if it's only monthly, particularly when you're starting, you lose momentum. You, as the mentor, you don't, it's hard to keep track of what somebody said a month ago. 2 weeks ago, different story. And more frequent than that becomes really kind of a time drain for a lot of people. And if a mentor is asking a mentee to do reading or any pre-work before a session, that becomes more difficult if it's more frequent than the twice monthly. Establishing mentoring behavior norms. I mentioned this earlier with the organizer, but think about confidentiality and transparency. What I think works really well in this is for there to be agreement that nothing that is spoken in these sessions goes anywhere else. And organizations may want to have more, a little bit more access to what happened in those discussions. Perhaps you can reach an agreement that the agendas are being shared. But the fact of the matter is, the more that is that goes outside of this relationship, the harder it is for somebody to open up and make themselves vulnerable. And that vulnerability is where the growth happens. And make sure that if there are off-limit topics or limits to the action that mentors can take, that those are established. An off-limit topic could be a mentee says, this is I'm finding this organization is a clown show. I got to get out of here. And the mentor is now in this situation where, are they supporting the mentee in their effort to leave the organization, or are they trying to retain? And it may be that you set up bumpers that say, you know what, my role here is to help you do as well as you can while you're in this role. So why don't we focus on that? Or you may set up different rules on that. But having that for the organization to understand that becomes kind of important. Do you provide progress reports? Because if you do, how do you do that in a way to keep the confidentiality? What I find works really well is for that progress report to come from the mentee, not from the mentor. Let it be for the mentee to be able to say, here's what I've been getting out of it, rather than doing anything where it looks like the mentor is sharing information about what happened in the sessions. I don't know that this is a slide that shows up very well, but this is what my organization does in that respect. We kind of feel that from the outside, an organization is paying us to mentor somebody. We want to make sure they understand their return on investment. So we're asking the mentees to fill out a one-person survey, monkey survey, asking questions on their satisfaction level, how valuable was the pre-work that we do, including what pre-work, as if they weren't receiving anything, how useful were the sessions themselves, open-ended questions on how could the mentoring experience be made more valuable, what's the most important thing you've gained, what's the most important behavior change you've made. We ask a question about how much the mentor has challenged people to experiment outside their comfort zone. And you might think that this is the golden mean. Actually, as often as not, we'd like to see people being pushed a little bit out of their comfort zone. Maybe not to the point that they're stressed, but maybe just a little bit beyond, feeling like it's the appropriate level. And then we do a net promoter score at the end to get that. And this is the information that gets shared with somebody in the organization, with the administrator, and also with the mentor, so the mentor can make any course corrections that they have to along the way. I want to go through from the mentor standpoint what I see as a couple of best practices and made these into tablets of stone for you. So the first is let the mentee drive. They set the agenda to this. It's their goal that's in mind to try to do. Be insightful and thoughtful in the work that you do. Ask great questions that gets the mentee to be thinking. Practice empathy and patience. Support the mentee's needs and recognize that this may be emotional support that they want as much as anything else. It may just be that they want to realize that they're not the only ones thinking the way that they're thinking. Be cultural aware. Be open to you learning things that you didn't necessarily know about your own organization. Inspire confidence. For a lot of people, particularly when they're in new roles and they're going up the corporate ladder, they feel imposter syndrome. And being able to help them think through that and encourage their work on their own goals becomes really important here. Be intentional. Think through the goals that they have, that they've stated, and that you have to try to get them to a higher place. Show your scars. Be open and make yourself vulnerable so they'll make themselves vulnerable. This is one of the most important ways that somebody can learn from this experience, is that they see that somebody in a more senior position has messed up along the way. Be present. Don't multitask. Give them the time that they deserve. Try to hold this meeting time sacred if you can. Be constructively objective. Tell them what you think, not what you think they want to know, what they want to hear. That's important. And then finally, facilitate and guide. If you're in your car and you've got your GPS on, it never tells you you're going the wrong way. It always tells you how to get to where you're trying to go from where you are now. And that's kind of an important piece to try to work through this. Questions? I'm going to keep going until somebody stops me. All right.
Steve, I have a question. You talked
yes.
about having the mentee choose.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking about that. So, and then also, does it have to be so formal, like having, doing a matching and documenting and all of that stuff?
Certainly
and then
not at the, yeah. Not
how
at
do
the
you have the
beginning, it
mentee
doesn't have
choose?
to.
Not in the beginning, but how
Yeah.
does the mentee choose? I'm kind of like, that's a little gray area for me. So do you have the mentors say they want to sign up and then you present those options to the mentee? Or are you saying have conversations with them, the mentee pair, and just meet with maybe 3 potential mentors and then the mentee chooses?
Yeah, what we often would do is give like a thumbnail description of the mentors. Maybe they know them, maybe they don't. And this person is working in this group. They've had this kind of experience. They've had whatever it is that may a paragraph or so, not a whole lot more than that, on why we think this would be a good person for you to work with. The mentee takes these, let's say, 3 options and chooses their number 1 pick. Instead of going through the whole interview process with all 3, just start with number 1. If number 1 feels good, go with number 1.
Okay.
If number 1 doesn't feel good, go on to number 2.
Okay. But you
Okay.
recommend that they chat, not just read and pick off paper, but definitely.
Yeah.
Okay.
I say they pick their first choice and then have a chat to make sure that they feel like this is somebody they can work with. I mean, it's a terrible thing if these folks are unaligned in the process.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, for the mentee then, number 1, own the opportunity. Don't be intimidated, particularly, and that can happen if they're working with somebody who's high up in the organization. prepare an agenda and share that ahead of time. Because again, they're the driver of this. They're driving the discussion topics. If they give the mentor even a day's notice on the things they want to talk about, that can be a big help. Seek and be open to feedback. That's a hard thing. And, you know, but the whole thing about mentoring is trying to create a safe space to be asking for asking questions and to be involved in this. Make yourself vulnerable, again, because that's going to be how it grows. And the idea of mentorship is trying to take away some of those boundaries. Las Vegas rules should apply. What gets said in those sessions stays in those sessions. Honestly assess your progress along the way. Share the progress that you think you're making with your mentor. For a lot of people, there might be like, you know, as part of the process, setting up a 90-day plan or iterations of a 90-day plan over the course of a year. Be willing to discuss those short and long-term goals. And if there are things that are getting in the way, talk about them. Maybe the mentor has suggestions about it. Maybe the mentor can remove some of the obstacles themselves. And then follow up on the commitments you make. If you've made a plan, if you've got goals in mind, be prepared to share the progress that you're making on those commitments. And if you're falling short, you know, talk about what you might be able to do to, you know, to get back on track or to re-gauge what your intent is. There are some things that get in the way of successful mentoring. And part of it is this lack of clear goals from the mentee. Reported missed sessions due to other priorities. That's something that happens a lot. In the work that we do, we're trying not to share anything that happens within the sessions with anybody else in the organization. Between the mentor and the mentee, those are those Las Vegas rules. Exceptions can be if somebody continually misses sessions, because it says something about the level of commitment that they have in the whole process. Or if they're not filling out their the feedback that they're supposed to be given, because that might be something that is on the mentor's plate to make sure is they're committing to the organization. So, you know, those things might, you know, somebody might be reported, but it's not what's going on in the sessions themselves. If there's no sponsorship at the top in leadership, that can be a big issue on this. If it's just that administrator who's a manager level trying to do all of this, that can be kind of tough. So it's really important for there to be somebody more senior than this who can take over. You folks are often in a position where you can be that person. An ill-equipped mentor giving poor advice. Part of the process early on when mentors are recruited is giving them some tools to understand how they act as a mentor. Lack of a feedback loop. So, because without that, a mentor doesn't know how to necessarily adjust. And poor communication throughout between the two of them, and with between the mentor mentee and then the administrator. So all of those are areas where this may come into some problem. I mentioned earlier that I had a next to last slide that I wanted to share, and here we are. So who mentors the mentors? How do you handle these senior folks who may not have somebody internally that's easy for them to work with? A few thoughts. It can be a board member. Board members don't necessarily have a whole lot of time. Thinking about getting with them twice a month might be more than you can get. But talking to board members and trying to establish a relationship, if you're in the C-suite or something like that, can make a lot of sense. Reverse mentoring. This may be a way to handle that new senior person who's coming in, is having as part of the onboarding somebody who's junior than them who can share with them some things about the organization. Buddy systems sometimes work, peer-to-peer relationships. Internally, I'd say there is some success with this. When this works best is in large organizations where perhaps the guy who's the managing director of a global advertising agency whose office is in Dallas can talk to her counterpart who's in Toronto and have that relationship. That might work. External resources, COO Forum, Executive Springboard, executive coaches, somebody else that you find. And then finally, people who used to work in the company who've left. When I started Executive Springboard, my working title for the business was, I love the idea of Springboard, but it didn't occur to me to have an executive in the title. And I was calling it NDY Springboard, for not dead yet, because a lot of the people who were mentors had left corporate life, they were consultants, or they were retired, and they had something they wanted to give back. And a lot of people who would be who have left organizations for retirement in senior roles would love that opportunity, and that's a place to go as well. So there we are. Thank you. I know we have a couple of minutes for questions. Be happy to take anything that's still on your mind.
Going once, going twice.
It's good for me to be able to see people now after having my screen up the whole time.
That's right. Yeah, yeah. All right. Well, if there aren't any other questions, and actually we'll have Steve's contact information and the copy of the presentation out on our Slack channel. So, or the recording. So, if you have follow-on questions, we'll make sure that you get contacted to Steve. But first off, let's just thank Steve. Wonderful job. Thank you so much for imparting knowledge on us today. We are very appreciated. It's always great to see a friend of the COO Forum back in front of us.
Well, delightful to have the chance to talk with everybody today, and thanks so much for being part of this and for the great questions that you all asked.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. Thanks to everyone for taking time out today. Don't forget, December 12th, we have a nonprofit focus meeting for those of you in nonprofit. December 20th is our executive session. And then January 17th, I can't believe it already, kicking off 2025 with a wonderful presentation on AI-driven leadership. So with that, everyone, thank you. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Fiona. Thank you, all members. Have a wonderful and safe, fun weekend.
Thanks, Steve. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Alrighty.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.